A significant feature added to Blocks version 4 is the support for low-latency live video. There are essentially two ways to bring in such live video feeds into Blocks. One is connecting a video capture device to a USB port on the Pixelab player, such as this one from Enogeny. There are other similar devices from Epiphan and Magwell. Essentially, they take in something like HDMI or SDI and converts it to a USB, typically USB 3 feed that you then bring into the player, and the player can then bring that on screen. And the way you would do that in Blocks, once you have it connected to the USB connector of the player, is that you add a live video. So that would be your live feed, and then you would select the kind of input that you want to use here, which in that case would be local video in. Now, this video will only play on the particular player to which the USB capture device is connected. So it is a good way to bring in a video to show up on a single player. The latency, or the time it takes for the capture to the video appears on screen, is very low. It's a few frames, like 2-3 frames at most. So it's extremely low latency, and it lends itself very well to all kinds of video, including where you have an IMAG situation where a speaker that you are seeing on camera and also appearing on screen, a PowerPoint or anything like that, where you want to have very low latency, and you may only want it to show up on a single display anyway. The other way to bring in live video is to connect it over the network, and then you would use, for example, this RTSP stream. That was something that was available in previous versions of Blocks, but it didn't work with most players, only with a few players that did have built-in support for RTSP. Now we've added the ability to manage that through the Block server, so you can use this with pretty much any player, or any browser for that matter. And the latency can be quite low. It can be in the region of maybe a few hundred milliseconds up to half a second or a second, a little bit depending on the settings. So let's focus a little bit on this one and see how it works. In this case, I'm using another capture device. This one is from a brand named KiloView, and they have a couple of different models. This one is taking an HDMI and outputting it onto the network. There you have another similar device that takes in SDI instead, and they have a pass-through and they have a separate audio input so you can take audio either from the HDMI connector, or you can take audio from a 3.5mm analog jack. And this is the settings for that device, the E2. And you can see that I have a video feed going into it here now. And the mainstream is this one that I'm then going to bring into Blocks. So once you've set this up, and you can do various kinds of settings in here, you can set things like the bitrate, and perhaps most importantly when it comes to latency is the GOP size. And here you can, I've set it to a fairly conservative 30 frames GOP structure, which means there's a single keyframe per every 30 frames. And this is a 30 frames per second camera, so there will be a GOP size of about 1 second. So that will give some amount of delay, and let's start looking at that, and then we can tweak these as we try other settings later. Okay, so we go back here, and then we pick up this RTSP URL that we have down here. So I just copy this from here, copy. And then I go over to Blocks where I've added this live video, and then I'm going to pick RTSP stream, and then I'm pasting in that URL here. And you see the live video feed now appearing on screen here. So let's go back, and we have the display. It's just another Chrome window I have for testing purposes up here. So we, as usual, we just drag the block over to that Chrome display, and then it will show up there. And then I can trigger this little cuckoo bird here, and you should be able to see the live video feed. Okay, and go back in, press the button now. And you see there is a small amount of delay, maybe half a second. And you can go in and you can tweak these settings a little bit to reduce that further. So we can go in here and we can say, you can go down to maybe a GOP structure of 5 frames if you want to use a little bit of compression, or you can go all the way down to all iframes, and then you may need to bump the bitrate up a bit to maintain quality. Now, there isn't a whole lot happening in the scene here, so I think it will do a pretty good compression anyway. But if you have a lot of motion in the scene and you go to all iframes, then it may make sense for you to bump up the bitrate a bit as well. But I think this should work well, and it should reduce the delay a little bit. So let's try that again. Okay, and I pull it back in now. And you can see that we're down to about 0.2 seconds, something like that, if you run it with all iframes. So having these kinds of settings is a good idea because it allows you to control these things and also be able to set the bitrate to compensate for any possible quality loss.